say is to show that across the UK, privatisation has decimated public transport. These issues are happening across cities and towns across the UK. It's not just Glasgow, but we can learn from these. And I think some of the things they mentioned when we met with Susan Aiken last week, she's very in favour of bus partnerships. So that's something this year we're going to have to fight even harder for regulation and franchising, and probably have powers for public ownership that they don't have in England. And I think Glasgow can be a leader on showing what you can do with those powers. And we also have the ScotRail franchise coming to an end early, which is something again we could just see given over to another private operator. But I don't want to talk so much more. I want to open this up to see what people have for questions for our two speakers, or what you want to hear more from the campaign. So I'll just open it up to you guys now. Neil?
I've got a question for Pascale. If, as it says there, integrated transport is a thing we ultimately want, and that's one of the big aims and demands I get Glasgow Moving. So I would like to ask Pascale, do you think that the fact, because integrated transport is a big point right over all modes of transport, do you think the fact that they've got Chris Froome in Manchester and the council's here campaigning for greater, more active travel, and they've announced that they're going to spend £500 million over the next 10 years in improving cycling and walking infrastructure, how much does that influence that Andy Burnell's turned around and says they're going to deregulate buses? Would you agree that there must be, because everything should be connected, that there must be some, I mean, like in Glasgow we don't have a big figure of that, saying we need better bikes, we need better cycling, walking, we need better public transport. So how much of an influence do you think, much difference do you think that makes in, you know, in Manchester?
Thanks.
I assume you're aware of what I'm talking about, yeah.
Yeah, we can take some more questions, yeah? Jennifer, you have it.
I've got two questions. The first one is the cash that we're getting in Glasgow around the city deal, and the cash that Steve talked about to be targeted at particularly northern cities in England. I'm disappointed in some of the way in which that's focused on kind of redevelopment and regeneration without any thought really to integrated transport systems, and also the very poor and shoddy cycle infrastructure that sometimes is built, so it's very inconsistent and not really, it doesn't operate in an integrated fashion. So how can we, it seems to me that a lot of this capital grants or funds that become available aren't really put through the democratic processes, so there's not like really any accountability about how people get a say. It's just kind of, you know, the smart and the powerful of the city, so-called, that get to oversee where it goes. So have you had any success in intervening in those kind of projects, and can we learn, have you got any plan for that? And my second question is around working people in the city, because it seems to me that we've really, I'm involved in the trade union movement. It's very, very difficult to get public transport to meet the needs of working people. The difficulties we've had over at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, for instance, where transport plans that were put in proposals have just not generated the promises that were made. And so what happens is you have a shift working workforce who are trying to get to their work, and they can't rely on a public transport system. So what they do is they campaign around parking and car usage, rather than we have a collective effort to meet the needs of those people as citizens, and that's ecological and it meets green demands as well. So how can we partner up to make sure that we put at the forefront the issues that ordinary working people face in their daily lives, so that we can show that plans like this will not only benefit their pockets but make their lives easier, and they can use their cars less.
Yeah, my question is in relation to, I suppose, Manchester, primarily because of the issues you've brought up in relation to bus transport. You've obviously made progress in franchising services, and that begins to give you some control.
We haven't done that yet.
over routes and pricing and so on. Have you begun to think about the whole issue of how a whole network of services municipalisation of the whole bus service, how can it all be brought back into public ownership? I don't think it's that easy, and I wondered if you'd begun to think about some of the issues that you would face if you were in the position where, you said, right, we can begin to bring this into public ownership. Now, the reason I ask that question is because the Scottish Government has not got rid of, and I don't even know if they have the power to get rid of, the 1985 Transport Act. Because the 1985 Transport Act was the act that opened the door to competition. And it was competition between public transport, between different bus companies, between bus and rail and so on. It was a total disregard of the role of the car. And the other thing that comes to mind, because there was something else that the government of that time did, and that was the deregulated part of the planning system. And that opened the door to business parks, retailing to an extent, although that had already begun to happen, moving to locations where car is more convenient than using the bus, and where the economics of providing bus services is profoundly damaged. And it's one of the reasons, even though I want to see bus services back in public ownership, there are issues to do with when you begin to spatially diffuse such strategic uses, it ratchets up the marginal costs that bus companies face, and therefore makes it very, and also of course in that form of diffusion you don't have the, I suppose, the kind of load factors, the densities that will give you a decent public service.
We need to move on. Just another question. Sorry.
Well, should we get some more?
Really
do these
issues
three
to do with
questions
that.
there. So it was mainly about the question about governance and about how have you investigated municipal ownership?
The issues of bringing them back into public ownership.
So maybe I'm going to do it chronologically, maybe because that's how my brain works. And feel free to interrupt if I'm not answering because I'm taking notes. But basically, it's a really great question. I feel like I do not think about Chris Boardman very often, and that's not because he's doing fantastic work, but it feels like our work is very separate. For example, it would have been fab to meet him. I feel like I sent him a friendly email being like, hello, and it was like, okay, cool. I think what is more helpful is the fact that we've got a really bad rail network, and that leads to Andy Burnham constantly being emailed about how bad the rail is, how bad buses are, and I think that is something that as citizens we need to always be doing that, always complaining. My mate is like, why are we so quiet about this stuff? Why do we just take it? We need to be getting angry all the time. We need to be planning big things and taking big actions, because obviously we're not, people are doing big things, but we generally need to create more of a sense of entitlement. So I'd say it's around that, and him getting those constant emails. He says, I'm emailed about buses and trains all the time, and that creates a narrative in his head that this is a problem. So I would say that's more it, but also we're a constant thorn in his side. We have community meetings all the time. We are always doing actions. We're outside his office regularly, and we're in the media as well. And so we're creating a narrative. This is a problem. Here is the solution. You're either on our side or you're not, or you're on the bus company's side. With regards to a city deal. What was this question about? Regeneration?
It's about
yeah.
infrastructure and how we can determine these plans, right?
Yeah.
Especially the ones that are coming from kind of regeneration plots rather than transport.
Overall, city deals across Scotland's been about 5.2 billion
Yeah.
pot. to be used
Yeah.
for various
I think
regeneration stuff.
probably answer.
Yeah.
So something that we have 1.8 billion in the Glasgow City Region Jail, which is 8 local authorities. So there's 1.8 billion pounds on that, and we're told the council can't afford to regulate buses. I don't think they can't afford to. I think they spend the money on the wrong thing. There's a lot of money spent on roads, and there's a lack of consultation because the City Region Cabinet is made up of the 8 local authorities. It's headed by Susan Aitken, but there's no representatives from the communities at all on it. It's a very bureaucratic system, which we would like to see.
And Audit Scotland last week had a damning report on it. Auditors tend not to use flamboyant language or language, but the language used was sort of measured, but it basically said this money has been wasted for the last few years. There's no accountability. It's road planning schemes that have been signed off.
Absolutely.
Now, closed deal,
A
now
long
deals
time
about
ago as well, before the climate emergency was declared.
And I
Oh,
think-
yes. So it's something that should be
Can I
hammering them on.
Can I just make a wee comment on the city deal? I'm really glad it's been brought up. Don't want to interrupt the flow of things, but very briefly, and even I know very much about this, about the city deal. Now, one of the big parts of the city deal is the huge bridge that is to be built in Yoker. Now, I'll say it right here, it's a vanity project, it's not worth anything at all, and yet everywhere I see it's being praised as a wonderful way forward. And I think this group very quickly should be taking up issues about that. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much we can do to build a narrative in the media, or like give a sense of the things, how money is being spent. You know, when you read that there's like 40 billion being spent on roads, and then people, you know, talk about 100 million to regulate our buses as being too much, or being a waste of money. You're like, oh, come off it. And I think I'd like to think that we've, like, as I say, through releasing the research on the amount that they're pocketing every year, through constantly asserting that, you can start to chip away at that. And actually, we've been really, I personally haven't noticed too much like anger around 100 million to bring our buses into public control, because people are like, oh well, it doesn't work. They seem to have done the research, like this is how it should work. I mean, I think, yeah, that's where, going back to that point, media, journalists, getting them on side, doing the research, releasing like stories which show your narrative. We also did one, which actually didn't work, but around the amount of new green buses that you could buy if you brought our buses into public control as well. And I think the point around like shift workers, again, maybe I'm talking too much about media and journalists, but like we've always tried to like meet journalists and encourage them to do stories and meet to people and chat to people, and I'm always like encouraging our passengers to like speak to journalists and tell their story, because, you know, Maria was featured in the Financial Times, and it starts to show people that, oh, actually this is affecting people, and actually why shouldn't we expect transport at 4 a.m? Some people don't, you know, people think, oh well, that's too much to ask. It's not too much to ask at all. And the Leeds climate jury recently recommended like bringing buses into public control as their first priority. With regards to have we thought about issues of municipalisation, not as much as we should have, because unfortunately it is illegal and we're trying to win our battle. And I would refer to Get Glasgow Moving, that have done amazing work like pushing that debate. I think one of the big ways that we can be pushing that is to be campaigning for free buses, because that's something that we know we need, is what lots of cities have done. And in doing so, we start to open up a discussion. Okay, well that costs money. Well, where's that money going to? At the moment, it will go to shareholders' pockets, which is a joke. Do I want Brian Souter to have another castle? No, thank you. In Switzerland, they also have laws around if there is a community of over £300, there is a certain amount of public transport that has to be available to people. It's about access, and as your community gets bigger, you get access to more buses, etc. per hour. This is exactly the kind of entitlement we need to be building into our laws and our campaigning here. And there's some research around transport for new homes that have been looking at basically building settlements that are multi-purpose. They've got shops, they've got stuff, so that we're not having to travel all over. So I'd really recommend looking at their research, because they have case studies and they're working with local authorities to build that into their planning.
Who was that? I missed who it was.
Transport for New Homes, who are also funded by the Foundation for Integrated Transport.
Did you have anything to put in, or can you take more questions? Or?
Sorry.
No, you're the one who knows about this. I just want to say that it is, for us, a massive paradox because we're constantly trying to like elucidate what's wrong with franchising, and yet genuinely also arguing for franchising on buses. And you know, and it isn't. I mean, yeah, public control, exactly. Yeah, public control regulation, never the word franchising. But and that's really important. But you know, it does leave us. I think it is really important. Two things: municipalisation. Definitely, we should not be letting go of that, and always making the point that, like, you know, the value of investment. If we're going to be asking for loads of public investment, why are we going to invest it? You know, there's no incentive for the government to invest unless it's all going back into communities and building the case. I think from an investment level, I have heard that there are ways to get around the English situation.
Yeah.
And we need to look at them more, but I mean, I would love to see like we find like the perfect place, try and get around those rules, and then we use that as a case study, and that kind of thing could be an amazing thing to try to do. But yeah, free buses, perfect example. Other ways of making the case, and I think, you know, we need to talk about new national campaigns. One suggestion that was made to me by Simon Norton of Foundation of Integrated Transport before he sadly passed last year was that he wanted to have you know, to do a campaign for a statutory right to transport and maybe to community, to mobility, but a statutory right to transport, and to try and get that to be taken on, because if that was the case, they have to do it. Oh dear, this isn't financially working, we have to change it. So yeah, making all these other things that pull them in that way, plus also trying to hack the legislation and get around it, I think. Yeah, we keep thinking about that one, definitely.
Miles, and I'll take from you, and I'll take Mike as well.
Yeah, I just got a quick question. I think everyone made excellent points that people really don't like the current state of public transportation. I don't think you'll find anyone who loves First Bus. So my question would be, how do you take that general public anger? Clearly the majority is on the same side on this. How do you take that public anger? How do you get the public to actually do the right thing? How do you help them create change in government? I feel that's one of the biggest obstacles that we all face.
Yeah, just on that point about getting around legislation that Emily made, one of the biggest successes in public transport and public ownership in Scotland over the last few years has been on the ferry network, where the Scottish Government accepted legal advice that the RMT put to them that they would no longer have to franchise the CalMac network every 5 or so years. Where Circle would try and take it over, they'd be the competitor. That's now been scrapped entirely, which saves millions of pounds to the public purse, bidding to a different arm of the Scottish Government to run ferries, which are going to run at public subsidy anyway. Although the Northern Isles, Orkney and Shetland, are still tendered, and I think there's a legal action happening over that from CalMac against the Scottish Government at the moment. But on the trains, I think there's a really good opportunity. The Scottish Government have said there will be a public sector bid. I mean, ideally they would just scrap franchising and it would be in public ownership anyway, but regardless, they've said there will be a public sector bid. And I think there's a real opportunity there for Glasgow Moving and other organisations across Scotland to focus on that over the next year. So it's 2022. It's
2022, I think.
Yeah.
Annie?
I'm sorry, that probably won't be a question, it'll probably be a wee bit more of an rant. I'm Annie Morgan, I've been supporting Glasgow Moving. Thanks for today, thanks everybody for today. I've taken part in some of the actions. I'm a member of the campaign against climate change and the Scottish Socialist Party, and I'm a member of Unite, and that's quite significant in terms of getting the unions kind of jiggy with it. On the free public transport and the public ownership, I want to say quickly, and it maybe turns into a question. I'm totally up for public ownership, totally, absolutely, and I've joined in the campaigns, not just for transport, across the board, renewables, you name it, public ownership, all the way. However, what does that public ownership look like? Because in Edinburgh, Lothian, the council have got the buses, Unite nearly had the drivers out in strike at the festival last year, bullying, long shifts, conditions for drivers didn't improve. I've just read yesterday while I was on the bus, I use the bus daily with my concession card, and that'll feed into the idea of free public transport. I'm a daily bus user. I'm lucky I live in an area called Govan, and we've got the subway, so it's quite integrated, it's really good, more of that. But back to Lothian, I read in my metro, on the bus yesterday, Edinburgh is the most congested city in the UK. So what are we doing about decarbonisation as we talk about public ownership? And also car culture. I think some people have already mentioned it. How do we bring car users, will be many of us here today, we could maybe do a wee leaflet campaign outside at Arnold Clark or something like that. But there's ideas like the Zip cars in London. Hire a car for an hour, hire a car for a day, hire a car for a week. You don't need to own the thing, you don't need to use it for daily transit. You know, you use a car only when you need to use a car. Maybe we could begin to change the mindset of car ownership, but that will mean greatly improving our buses and trains, because on the free public transport, which I'll try and be brief, because our campaign against climate change are calling for free public transport, as is my party, the Scottish Socialist Party. Now, I looked at Kansas, I looked at Dunkirk, I looked at Scandinavia, I looked at Estonia, Tallinn, and now the whole of Estonia, and I looked at Luxembourg. Luxembourg didn't change car use. Still got massive car use in Luxembourg. Dunkirk's looking good, and Dunkirk had one for the employers to pay for it. Bang on. Estonia goes for tax. So there's nothing really free under capitalism. You've got to look at how it gets funded. Kansas has just started, great, good on them. So in principle and on our journey, I'm really up for free public transport. However, my wee bus pass, we need to watch that they don't up the age for that or something and start taking it off us. But we could extend it, as Becky and I have talked about, to students, to low income. Now, I don't like means tested benefit. I'm in receipt of universal credit. What a nightmare. The means tested benefits are not nice. However, on our journey to free public transport, there's the job seekers, there's the students, there's the low income people. We could maybe look at extending the concessionaries.
Mike, do the last question.
Two things: public control and public ownership. Pascale rightly talked about London as being a beacon of public control, but of course public ownership is a more complex issue. The only publicly owned part of the London transport system is the London Underground. The London Overground that's recently been extended is privately run, and in particular the Crossrail scandal. And it's not just the scandal about, which is the biggest construction project and biggest rail infrastructure project in Europe. It's not only the scandal about the fact that it's overrun by 2 years and people therefore paying for it and not getting the benefits, but the fact is that the trains will be run by MTR. MTR, for people who know it, is the metro system of the Hong Kong government that is actually owned by the Chinese government and will be extracting profit into, in effect, China. Now, we've heard a lot about Huawei running strategic services. Crossrail goes through the City of London and the West End, but nobody seems to object to the fact that you can have privately owned rail companies running absolutely crucial infrastructure. So just because there's public control in London doesn't mean there's necessarily public ownership, and the battle needs to be on both fronts. Second thing is about democratic control and accountability. Confession time, I commuted into Greater Manchester for 6 years. Greater Manchester is a made-up area. It's comprised of, people think of it as Manchester, people haven't been there think of it as Manchester, but actually it's a whole series of towns. I worked in one, Rochdale, Wigan, Sale, Oldham, and so on, each of which has its own local authority. Now, Greater Manchester as an entity actually began as a bus network. It's really interesting. 1969, it was called South East Lancashire and North East Cheshire. They created a bus company called Selneck, and they were going to create a local authority to run the entire Selneck network, but they decided Selneck wasn't the right name for it, so they decided to call it Greater Manchester. Manchester itself is only about 20% and 1 of 10 local authorities. And they created the Greater Manchester County Council in 1974, which for a brief period of 11 years before Margaret Thatcher abolished it, did actually have democratic control through 100 elected councillors controlling the service. What we've now got is a city deal, combined authority with elected mayor is the terminology, where the democratic accountability of people is massively reduced compared to that whole question of democratic control. And particularly when we're looking at Glasgow, both at the city deal and the way in which the metro is going to be funded and financed that they're talking about, particularly if it follows the Crossrail pattern, then we have to question seriously about it. But also we have to question how is the democratic control going to operate? Because at the moment the city region executive consists of 8 unelected directly local authority chiefs, and is run basically by the officers rather than the elected members, and actually having some kind of democratic control over the services that we're looking at for Manchester, for Greater Glasgow, to bring back the whole concept of an elected transport authority is a really important aspect, I think, of the battle that we need.
Just really appreciate that point. I've never been at a public meeting where I've heard so many great things. Like, it's amazing. I wish I lived in Glasgow, to be honest. I just want to mention Ellie's musical. You might know about it. That goes through the you guys' collaboration musical of the history of Greater Manchester buses, which we saw in Manchester 3 months ago. So it was lovely. It was music to my ears to hear that, because exactly. It went through from the 60s and up to Selneck, up to the Greater Manchester Council, and then undid all the work, and now we're redoing it again. I think that's that history is so interesting. So I love that you said that. I hadn't even thought that out. I think it's a brilliant point. How do we democratise the former passenger transport executives further? Like, that's a whole issue perhaps we can talk about. So I love that issue. And yes, European examples as well. Just wanted. Sorry, do you want to? Sorry, come.
Just one point about passenger transport executives. I don't know if people know, like in 1969, that Transport Act, the places where they were set up. It was Manchester, Birmingham, Yorkshire.
6 metropolitan counties,
Newcastle and Glasgow was added, and that's what SPT is. But you were talking about like solidarity between those areas and how we can reinvigorate the powers of those transport authorities through that guy, the thing, Jonathan Bray's thing. I've forgotten what it's called.
Urban Transport Group. That is really okay. Yeah,
but they're all directly elected. The important thing is they're all directly elected.
Okay, sorry. It's a perfect example that those vestiges of what was there before, like we use that to build again. I think it's a really good point.
Just to run through those, so everyone gets a question answered. We started off with about how do you take public anger to make it kind of action from it, getting around the legislation, which I think we're going to pick up on how we get the Scottish Government not to just do a public sector bid and actually take over, and then talking about what does public ownership look like. So if you want to come in on those ones, just so we get them all answered because we're running out of time.
So I guess massively oversimplifying it, you create a sense of entitlement to decent public transport. You create a narrative that this isn't working, here's the solution. You take action, mass action together, targeted to put pressure on the people that make the decisions, and you do that until they listen to you and you escalate. That is how I would say. I don't know if that's helped or answered your question at all, but I think people feel angry. They know what the problem is. We need to tell them what to do to put pressure on for example, Andy Burnham. In terms of drivers don't have a great deal at all, and we need to campaign with them and stand in solidarity with drivers to improve their conditions. In the 80s, drivers were earning about the same as train drivers, and now that disparity is huge. So we need to do more. We definitely want to make sure that drivers get a better deal out of bringing our buses into public control. And we want to make sure that passengers are part of it, because democratic involvement and participation is a huge part of making public ownership sustainable. If you're interested in this, We Own It did a report last year called When We Own It, about how to do public ownership in a way that's caring, democratic, is part of people's lives, right? And in a way that they would like, because we don't always want to be involved in every little bit, but we do want to have a sense of it being ours. And there's loads of different ways that can be done. Liverpool is publicly owned ferries. We like that. And I think just with regards to we definitely need to go a lot further to disincentivising car use. My argument is that we need that alternative there first. But if anyone's interested, I think Leo Murray is one of the best writers on this, and he wrote a report called Away With All the Cars, for the Green New Deal, and that really clearly sets out the policies that are going to get us to a place where we have no cars, which is really fantastic. And just on public ownership, I do think public control, as I've mentioned, for all those reasons in terms of controlling your network, is a huge step and vital to public ownership, because a lot of the publicly owned bus companies, and some of the reason they've fallen over the past few years is because they are still to a certain extent having to compete with private companies encroaching on their territory. And we need to be able to say, no, we run services here and we run them for our communities. In London as well, there's a stipulation that they can be the operator of last resort. If a company ever falls, they can get running within 24 hours. So again, these are some ways that we could start to be like, well, this company ain't doing well, I want this. I want a publicly owned operation.
Can I ask something? In the meantime, before we have public ownership, who is it who would be influential in getting First Bus to provide a more comprehensive system in Glasgow, like tomorrow? Is it Susan Aiken or who? And can anybody force them to provide a better service?
I guess that's a really good question. Probably a good question to drop back to is when we met with Susan Aiken last week. It's very clear Glasgow, we don't have one body, we don't have a mayor, which you have in Manchester, you have this one person to throw their weight behind it. We don't have that in Glasgow, we don't have any governance, we don't have one body. But when we spoke to Susan Aiken, she said she's the best person to contact about transport. So I guess I would suggest an action to take away from today is everybody get in touch with Susan Aiken and make your case for regulation of the buses and public ownership, because we need everyone in this room to do that, and we need, like we've said, is to channel our anger into actions, which I think one of those actions would be really good, is everyone gets in touch with your local councillors and does so.
But would she be able to have any influence, or she just be completely tied up about it?
Yeah, the Transport Minister's Michael Matheson at a national
he
level.
would be the only one that would be able to force that.
He could force them. So I guess on those two things there are people who can get in touch.
But do I not? My understanding is that basically the private companies do what they want.
Yeah.
They want to reduce the use, they do. They want to expand it. They do.
Yeah.
We have no control over them whatsoever.
Well, can I just say, the partnership? They've got this partnership. So when the new SNP administration came in, this was their innovation, was to set up this partnership with the main bus operators as a way of trying to incrementally improve the standards. But when we met her on Wednesday, I said to her, could you go through that partnership and say to First Bus, right, you're only allowed to charge £1.50? And she said, she just kind of laughed and said no, but we can do that through franchising. So what we need to do is force SPT, who we're lobbying, and this City Region Cabinet, so that's all the councillors on the 8 councils on that City Region Cabinet, to seize those franchising powers, because if we don't do, the powers are there, they're there to be used by those councils and SPT, so that is going to be our main campaigning tactic this year, because if they don't put it in their regional plan, according to the legislation, they're not allowed to do it. And SPT aren't even on our side with it, because it's all about money. Like, it's all about how can we afford to do this. Like, nobody sees the big picture that we will save money in the long term.
Just take one last
Yes, I totally endorse what you said. This is actually entirely what we've got to do in terms of the bus. Is I think franchising is going to be the way it has to go. Sadly, I don't think we're going to get these municipal buses. Buses in council with no money. There's got no setup to deal with it. It's got to be done through franchising, and we've got to get SPT on our side.
We have capital funds. We'll just explain
sorry,
there is money.
At the moment, certainly not to take over the network in Glasgow. Second thing is about in the rail network in Glasgow. Two things about it. First of all, no matter who takes it on, there are serious issues about the capacity of the rail network we need to fix in Glasgow, and things are not going to work. So we should be campaigning on that issue as well.
Yeah.
And the third thing I really want to say is about the rail franchising. It seems a long way away, 2022, 1st of April 2022, when the new ScotRail system will come in. Michael Matheson, who you mentioned, is the Transport Minister, has said that the franchising system isn't fit for purpose. I believe it's actually worked much better in Scotland than it has in the rest of the UK, but there's no alternative for it at the moment, and there's not a lot of time. The lead-in time for these things is very long, and effectively the Scottish Government, Transport Scotland, are going to have to be thinking about this and actively getting this done by the middle of this year. So we've really got to be staying to pushing the pressure now before the summer to get this moving. And it's really important because if a bid is to be prepared, it's got to be a good bid, it's got to be very, very carefully put together. And there will be others wanting to bid for it as well, including very likely the incumbent holder, which is effectively is Netherlands State Railway.
Thank you. I'm going to say, we've only got 5 minutes left. I think if we make any more questions, it's going to run over. So I just want to say, I guess the main takeaways that I've seen, I don't know if anyone else from the committee wants to come in on this, but is the fact that we need to push further and more for, we have powers of public ownership in Glasgow, there's money there for it. I take the points on kind of Glasgow City Council doesn't have any money, but we have 1.8 billion in a city deal that's spent wrongly. So I guess some of the points I've taken away is just from how we make that city leading cabinet more democratic and accountable, how we regulate, and how we regulate our buses and push for that campaign, and also on the points of ScotRail. So I think what we need to do at our next committee meeting is organise for another public meeting for members and everyone who came today to discuss these strategies in more depth.
Can I answer this? Okay. I don't know how many people who are here weren't in the AGM earlier. Could you just show of hands? Okay.
Weren't.
So we had our Get Glasgow Moving had our AGM from 2 till 3 o'clock today. I know most of you are in here, but some weren't. So I just wanted to reiterate about our campaign. And I like that thing about the sense of entitlement, because that's exactly what we were trying to do in our slogan, is to say this is a human right, as the UN Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty said. This is a human right that is being breached, and we need to demand better public transport. So if you'd like to support the campaign and would like to join as a member, leave your details. If you want to join as a member, we're taking donations of £1 today. You'll get ticked off on the list, and then you'll get invited to the next follow-up meetings. So that's all we have to say. But I'm here.
Just to say a wee bit about the whole COP in Glasgow thing, because that's going to be happening. We've the Glasgow Trades Council, which is the collective body of the trade union movement in Glasgow, approached Glasgow Moving to try and combine and use the COP, as was described earlier, as a demonstration project for free public transport. I think if we can look at that coalition of groups and get those people together so that we can start looking at how we would demonstrate to all those different groups, workers, people with disabilities, young people in our city, how we can look at not only winning free public transport, but making that time period, getting it analysed, getting the experience of people understood, so that we can show the really great benefit that will then bring to all the different citizens of our city. So we're hoping to organise a joint organising meeting. We get Glasgow Moving and the trade union movement to focus in on that particular project, and I'm hopeful that we don't want to run against it, because we want to make it as collaborative as possible and run alongside. But it might be worth, if you're here for constituent organisations, thinking about just trying to have conversations in your own organisations about how could we think about what a difference 2 weeks of free public transport would make to the people that we represent, and how could we evidence that over that 2 week period if we win free public transport, so that we then combine at the end of that to make a big call for improved, if not free public transport in the city. So it's just to put that on people's agenda, because it's coming soon.
Yeah, when we have that date, we'll send it around to everyone that's given their email addresses, and everyone wants to come along. But apart from that, I've got nothing else to say to anybody. I think just thanks for coming along.